Dear colleagues, I am pleased to introduce you to the topic of my talk, visual propaganda, German and Soviet posters in Ukraine and Latvia during the Second World War. But at the beginning, I would like to apologize for my English. Just a second, I'll start the presentation. Okay, well. The wars of the last decade clearly demonstrate two trends. It's first, constant technical and technological improvement of the means of defeating the enemy and protection against its similar actions. And second, the use, albeit in a modernized form, of information technologies in the struggle for influence on mass and individual consciousness. In the latter case, we are talking about the desire to gain an advantage in the global information space, which makes it possible to influence the moral and psychological state of not only the personnel of the enemy's armed force, both real and potential, or civilian, but also the shape world public opinion in a certain way in a situation where the use of all types of weapons in interstate conflict is restrained by various mechanisms. All they cannot guarantee a peaceful resolution of absolutely all antagonism. Ideological weapons are a particular importance. Modern information technologies combined with the development of military psychologists have formed effective tools of mental destruction that can cause a sharp aggravation of the techniques of interethnic interface, social and political contradictions in one or more countries, uncontrolled development of conflict situation, and the economic and social political destabilization. This significantly weakens the defense potential of the target of intervention, which is difficult to achieve by other means. The Russian Federation hybrid war against Ukraine fully illustrated the possibilities of this type of confrontation. However, only them should be considered new in this case. Its connotation is quite suitable for extrapolation to other modern and previous interstate conflict, local and world war. After all times, including ancient and modern ones, armed confrontation was accompanied by propaganda campaigns. For the first time, the Second World War turns global information space into a field of ideological confrontation on a global scale, and the relevant technologies into a full-fledged means of warfare. At the same time, all the marine parties did exploit the widest range or possibility of this type or struggle, both in the choice of means and in setting and having specific goals, persuasion, intimidation, stimulation of certain exception and moods, formation of view and assessments of certain phenomenon or event in a given format, etc. At the same time, propaganda activities were timed to fulfill a priority task, legitimizing the government, totalitarian and occupation regimes, apologizing for expansionism and aggression, justifying war crimes, etc. And the nomenclature of means of moral and psychological influence during the Second World War, a special place was occupied by realized products such as political posters and caricature combining linguistic and figurative text. Posters and caricature proved to be extremely productive in terms of their function. My presentation, 1 second. Okay. Having been thoroughly tested in the liberal information field as well as in totalitarian and authoritarian states, the posters and caricature have proven to be able to reflect the most relevant phenomena and events of domestic or foreign political life in a prompt, dynamic, flexible, vivid, capacious, and at the same time conscious manner, and most importantly, to provide feedback in the reaction of the viewer, who is also the object of propaganda influence, to shape his or her way of perceiving the world in a given direction, and ultimately to achieve the adoption of certain values and behavioral models. It is a mobilization potential of realized products that gives grounds of classify. It is one of the most effective ideological tools which contributes to the maximum institutionalization of ideological confrontation. The Second World War was a unique field of ideological confrontation in terms of its eternal tension, in which all means of influence on the enemy and its own citizen were used without exception. The range of information warfare techniques used by all its participants was quite similar, yet there were significant differences in the style and content of ideological products of Western democracy and totalitarian or authoritarian regimes. The activities of propaganda service operating in the occupied territories of the state, including Ukraine and Latvia, as well as in Lithuania and Estonia, were even more peculiar. Political posters and caricature played a prominent role in propaganda efforts. The scale and the complexity of the task set by various actors, the global armed conflicts, as well as social structure of the target audience requires the authors of political graphics to use a high degree of variability and dynamism in the poster format. This stimulated a variety of genre, compositional, stylistic, and content solution designed in each case for a particular social, political, sometimes ethnic groups, and also involved the use of deliberately choosing nomenclature of means of visual and verbal transmission of ideological postulates, specific mobilization message in order to direct them in a certain direction. The phenomenology of political cartoons and posters is that they exist in two dimensions. First, as an artist product, and first as a tool for shaping certain moods and mobilization and simulation their orders to take certain actions. The properties make of the genres of political propaganda a unique phenomenon in terms of their purpose, means of certain and effectiveness of influence. At the same time, for modern researcher, graphic genres of propaganda are important types of historical source filled with information not only about military, political, and socioeconomic process, but also about the way they were reflected by artist techniques. The poster and the caricature are both genres of political and cultural discourse and belong to the so-called creolized text as a unique means of communication. Caricature and poster occupy an intermediate place between fine art and literature and perform an implied function. At the same time, the best examples of caricature and poster production are carriers of deploy, meaning artist image have the ability to influence broader society and process mobilization potential. Yeah. Just a second. Okay, action as a source of imperfect information. The poster and the cartoon really certain ideological attitudes, program behavioral patterns, and lay down certain value orientation, exploring the stereotypes of mass consciousness, symbols, and association of the time political posters and caricature relate ideological attitudes to various categories of participants and contemporaries of the Second World War in a acceptable and understandable form most recipients, shaping not only the perception of event and the way of perceiving the world, but also the behavioral patterns of large masses of people. The ideological components of the Second World War is a multi-dimensional, internally structured phenomenon. One of the obstacles to a comprehensive understanding of its phenomenology is difficult to determine of specific results of the propaganda influence of different segments of a society by the main participants. These circumstances make the researchers face the need of a multidisciplinary approach to understanding the logical process. The success of the posters and caricature was also determined by the successful writer or image in the text, the iconic and verbal components. Political posters perform informative, illustrative, emotive, satirical, and cultural memory function when interpreting the possibilities of the political posters and caricature as an ideological tools. One should first of all assess the way and the degree of the influence of individual group and mass consciousness as a complex synthetic product. The political poster and caricature involve an intellectual procedure of understanding. This is connected with the interpretation of the new, and there is a direct correlation between the basic background knowledge and the cultural and educational level of the interpreter has her ability to recognize the object, despite the fact the cultural phenomenon characterized by the multiplicity of meanings. The genres of caricature and poster programs, the most unified perception and understanding of what the author intended, and this process, the expression of addresses determined by the worldview, value, political orientation, cultural and educational level, social status, etc., are of great importance. Factors such as language, traditional and customs, historical past, psychological archetypes, ideological stereotypes, prejudice, etc., are themselves of the perception of the text, signs, and symbols of the culture. In this regard, the Jews who produced graphical products for residents of the countries and the occupied territories had to solve the most difficult tasks when assessing the effectiveness of visual propaganda. It should be noted that it was most effective when addressed to our own citizen and last effective when directed to foreign culture environment. The propaganda institution of both totalitarian regime have in common the formation of the image of the leader, the country, the image of defender, the image of the woman and the child. The decision of the Central Committee of the KPSU of March 11, 1931 on political art clearly stated the purpose of visual propaganda to survive as a powerful tool for the restriction for man. His ideology was oral life and economic activity, as well as tools that touch the minds and hearts of millions of people. The ambitious task of the political art of the Stalinist era was embraced to change the way of people think at deep level. The formation of the image of the Soviet man in the poster can be traced not to the central heroic image, but to the foreign companions on the positive hero, peasant and woman, bourgeois and rural. The fact that female or present figures were actively used in the poster narrative as ambiguous image capable of being both conditionally positives and conditionally negatives indicate the peripheral status in the structure of the concept of the Soviet person. Its core was formed by the future of masculinity, proletarian affiliation, and extreme organization of both consciousness and external manifestation, which made the Soviet man inseparable from the mass of the similarly internally and externally mobilized proletarians who formed a perfectly functional mechanism capable of being the engine of social progress, historical development. The Bolshevik leaders used another feature of their world view of the revolution society, the belief in the autocrat, by transforming the sacred component into a Marxist utopia. The terrorists of Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism recently instilled in their collective consciousness of complete redirection of the collective will and their source of power into the hands of the person's leader. The mechanics ways of things is also inherent in the Russian people to a great external, but the exclusive was also strongly integrated into the identity of Ukrainians during the 1920s and 1930s. As soon as the proletarian, who was once of the basis of Bolshevik mythology, lost its significance in visual propaganda, the image of Lenin and Stalin took the central and sacred place in the Soviet iconography. Their image appeared in political art quite early. One of the first Bolshevik posters images was of the revolutionary leader Lenin, who was used in the poster during the Civil War. And in 1920s, the appearance of Joseph Stalin, image of political posters, coincided with the first 5-year plan. At first, he was in subordinate position to Lenin, but 1932, Stalin image had acquired an equivalent status and soon became an even more important figure. By the beginning of the Second World War, the Soviet posters had emerged as a self-sufficient information source. Poster graphics were used and penetrated into all spheres of human existence. They agitated, propagandized, advertised, called for information, and performed other political tasks. The analysis of these posters makes it possible to represent the main vectors of the evolution of the Soviet model in worldwide and everyday life, to show how, with the surrounding of communist ideology, Soviet mythology transformed the state machine into a more monumental image of locomotive. In the general, the idea of moving forward a better future became perhaps the most important in the propaganda materials of the Soviet system, always making the central figure the image of the father leader, the main rules of the state, mythology, and his mission as a pioneer and leader. A similar algorithm of forming the image of the leader of the nation and the formation of personality cult around the leader was used by Nazi ideologies. In fact, these universal algorithms of authoritarian dictatorial regimes form the image of a new messiah. The similarities between the totalitarian regimes of the USSR and the Third Reich can be traced to the function of the ideological apparatus. The basic principles of anti-Soviet propaganda were formed in Germany by 1939. German ideologies successfully produced anti-important formal image of the Eastern enemy, not only among their own population, but also actively spread south of Western Europe. Posters and cartoons emblazing Asian barbarism and the red incantation, the brow hunger and inevitable death of civilization. The success of the Nazis anti-Bolshevik propaganda in Germany can be explained among the things by the successful choice of recipients, scale base, and their works, especially intensively with women and children. Visual products were widely distributed among the Hitlerjugend and the National Social Women's Organization. Poster graphics created terrifying image of East Asian barbarism advancing and destroying cultural and human value, will Greater Germany appeared as a defender of the world, called upon to stop the demonic horde that could soon engulf civilization. Unlike the USSR, immediately after signing the pact, the Germans did not tell their own propaganda, but slowed it down. They did not remove anti-Soviet posters and cartoons, but only suspended their publication in official publications. German poster propaganda in the occupied territories of Ukraine and Latvia was aimed at Poltan portrayed in Soviet system is a Jewish Bolshevik regime that committed crimes against its own population and posed a red threat to the revolt. It was also based on demonstrating the positive future of the new occupation authorities and the order of encourage the inhabitants of the occupied territory to cooperate and to use a fear of being sent to forced labor in Germany. Calls for work and reconstruction became the cornerstone propaganda message for the visual ideological products of this period. The local population was actively involved in the creation of poster image. Poster production became one of the means of conducting information warfare. However, German artists did not always like into account the mental solidarities of the local population. Netherlands displays the rebrandings of propagandists for recruitment operations. The illustrative segment was property design in short time. One of the most successful solutions was the use photography as a means of conveying information to recipient. According to Germany propaganda, photographs became an indisputable proof of the truthfulness of information in the minds of the Soviet population, and were supposed to arouse undeniable interest and create condition for mobilization for a certain task, in particular in the field of labor. It will also be important to know the significant number of posters by both the Nazis and the Soviets were prepared on the basis of established universal image, and the respondent group can be determined only by the language or subtext. One of the main direction of Nazi propaganda in the occupied territories was to inspire intolerance and incite hatred on the Jewish population. Hitler's entire reactionary theory is based on the polar opposition of Germans and Jews, who are identified responsibly with the apology of good and evil, God and evil in a universal scale, and other races occupy intermediate position on this vertical. The totalitarian ideological machine use press, cinema, and radio to indoctrinate the population of the lands occupied by Germany, and it's all the anti-Semitic orientation of the Nazis' ideological efforts was inextricably linked to anti-communist agitation, and this symbiosis made it possible to form an information space in which the identification of Jewry and communism and the political ideology of the USSR facilitated the construction of visualized version of the enemy image, expressing the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. It should be noted that the analogy between communist and Jewry proved to be a rather successful move in the first stage of the war. A complex system of ideological manipulation in the occupied territory was implemented according to a prepared plan. Thus, in June 1941, the Wehrmacht Propaganda Department developed instruction for the implementation of propaganda under the Barbarossa Plan. The first point states that the enemy Germany was not the people of the USSR, but only the Judo-Bolshevik government of that country with its functionaries and the Communist Party in general. The anti-Jewish propaganda carried out by the German military command in the occupied territory boiled down to a typical Nazi ideological construct about Jewish Bolshevism. Of the main tasks of the graphic products was to humanize the image of the Jew by identifying him as a Bolshevik or NKVD. The Nazi form a negative perception of Jews, who is the context of the Soviet terror and the punishment of class enemies took the place of executioners. All crimes against Jews were reduced to several general theses. Thesis first, political. Jews dominate political life, party and government positions of the regime in the USSR is Żydo-Bolshevitsky. Thesis second, racial, Jewish poison, the existence of the races and the peoples with their blood and race. So the Jew is a subhuman. And three, thesis, religious Jews are a people of God killers. such as devils, compasses, and performs of demonic rituals. And for thesis cultural, Jewish dominate social and cultural life ideologically, poison the surrounding peoples. And 5 thesis socioeconomics. Jews occupy a central position in the economy and the financial sphere, in trade and supply, and they exploit others. Yeah. Anti-Semitic propaganda in the occupied territory is represented by a wide array of printed visual products, among them political cartoons that saved and illustrate to periodicals or were presented by a separate group poster sheets attract special attention. The active use of anti-Semitic themes in visual propaganda was also reflected in the leaflets addressed to Red Army soldiers and civilians. Among graphic anti-Semitic propaganda, 2 main categories of characters in political cartoons stand out. The first includes depictions of representative of the party elite and the leadership of the USSR, with the main attack direct against Joseph Stalin. The second category includes cartoons whose main characters were Red Army soldiers, political advisors, and partisans. To form the image, the artist used characteristic hypertrophy and something fuses that were imposed of appearance of the political opponent: hooked nose, thick lips, bubbly eyes, insidious and counterfactual expressions. Visual propaganda also served to justify Nazi crimes under the condition of an information monopoly. The Nazi manipulated the public consciousness by presenting in illustrative series of leaflets, posters, newspapers, magazines, and brochures the political leaders of the anti-Hitler coalitions, as well as Red Army soldiers and partisans in the form of bandits with only implicit Semitic functional fusers actively using appropriate symbols in the drawings based on the analysis of anti-Semitic visual propaganda disseminated the occupied territory in 1941. 1944, it can be concluded that a wide range of artists, professional and amateurs, were involved in cooperation with the Nazis, designing postcards, posters, newspapers, and magazines. Their graphic work, despite the different artistic level, were distinction by the imagery originality of design and lucid light, which could make the materials in demand in various strata of society to incite ethnic hatred. In posters on series, the Jew is your eternal enemy, or Jew are your eternal enemies, and Jew have no place among you, and other depicting a Bolshevik, Nazi artist, it's a crane, Agricola, Melner, gives them typical Jew features, contrasting them with the real Aryans, warm Ukrainians, 7 German poster, Hitler soldiers at the people's friends, the murderers have come and this is not throwing back, etc. A strong, well built and friendly. Budinuk occupied one of the central place in the anti-Semitic propaganda repertoire. Jews were portrayed as ugly monsters who threatened the very existence of not only the Ukrainian population, but also the entire Europe in 1944. The theme of Germany as a savior and defender of the West became especially important in Nazi propaganda through Eastern Europe. The ideological processing of the population also included elements of anti-Semitic indoctrination in the pan-European context. Propagandists immediately responded to speeches by Reich leaders concerning the ideological position of Nazi leaders by using appropriate propaganda products. A real boom in cartoon was caused by Goebbels' speech of June 5, 1943, and the Berlin Sport Plays. A complete exclusion of Jews from Europe is not a matter of morality, it is a matter of state security. A Jew will always act as his rational instinct tells him to act. He cannot be otherwise, and just as a potato beetle destroy potatoes and cannot be otherwise, so Jews decompose nation and states. There is only one remedy for this radical elimination of the beast. It is now to look at the enemy camp to see that it is dominated by Jews alone. Behind Roosevelt is Jewish brain trust. Behind Churchill are Jewish, whispering the directive to him. Jews are the instigators of the entire Anglo-American Soviet press. Jews sit in the Kremlin and the true bearers of Bolshevism. Due the typographic technique and high article skill of the artist, German poster and caricature were mostly distinguished by a successful compositional solution, bright colors, and subtext that attracted the views attention and made an appropriate emotional impression. At the same time, there were products whose informative potential was low and was artistic. The decisions were unsuccessful because they ignored the mentality and way of perceiving local residents. Nevertheless, experts from Goebbels' office filed to overcome the contract between the content of propaganda materials and the release of the occupation regime. Political posters and caricature were not just the product of ideological service, they worked for the self-presentation and legitimization of political regimes, states, and national liberation movement during the Second World War. Thus, appearance should be determined by the so-called social, but in fact political order, but the most prominent role in political design was played by graphic products under totalitarian regime. It is no coincidence that experts argue that only in Nazi Germany and the communist USSR did the poster become a means of controlling the masses, while in other countries and played only an occasional role in the political plane. The dictatorial forms of German turn the ideological apparatus into one of the most effective mechanisms of brainwashing and mobilization of the board state of society to fulfill certain political tasks. They increased the demand for visual materials that carried an appropriate ideological charge, led to the emergence for entry layers of political cartoons and posters in Western democracy. These genres have long been in the status of a kind of indicator of the dominant modes and essence of the functioning of various political force and individual public and state figures. So during the war, the consolidated perception of friends and foes in those publications that differentiated the platform of the constructive political parties only became more pronounced. In contrast, the USSR experienced a radical rebirth of its ideological, which were for guise of the course arrangement with the Western countries that were members of the anti-Hitler coalition and on the one hand and irreconcilable confrontation with Nazi ideology, one of them. Just a second, please. The propaganda machine of the Third Reich also solved several unique tasks. Propaganda campaign aimed at implementing or rather advancing the project of a new Europe, which in fact hides the desire of established Nazi Germany hegemony on the continent, were combined with two more vectors of ideological efforts by Goebbels of his countering Judo-Bolshevism and legitimizing the new order in the eastern occupied lands. The implementation of the political course of all the warring parties by means of visual agitation and propaganda was carried out various institutions in the USSR. The political bureau of the Central Committee of the KPBU performed the leading function in this area, and its ideological departments became a kind of never-through, which impulses were transmitted from the center of the periphery in the armed force. The organization of this work was intruded to the main political department of the Red Army. Party organs in the Soviet rear and political organs in the armed force had corresponding structure: publishing house, editorial office, printing house, that ensured the output of ideological realized products. In Germany, there was a Ministry of Education and Propaganda, which was responsible for implementing the line developed by the Nazi Party of Hitler personally in the territories captured by German troops. There was a network of specialized bodies subordinated to the propaganda department of the OKW, the press and the propaganda department of Ministry of the Eastern Occupied Territories, and the Eastern Division of the Ministry of Education and Propaganda. It includes a subdivision called Vineta for work in territory USSR. It's the headquarters of the commander of the operational area farming group South. There was a propaganda department. It's for Ukraine. The services were in charge of press organs and facilities for the production of posters and the types of small printed materials in Western democracies. It's nice. It's traditionally been dominated by private and corporate initiative. Newspapers and magazines published the works of the most famous artists working in the caricature and poster genres, government against the military services provided with ideological products for civilian and military personnel. With the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, Russia began to the Soviet posters of the Second World War as a propaganda material that would be part of the mobilization campaign. 1 second. Okay. Stone Donetsk, Ukraine, and poster for Second World War, Latvija, Motherland Calls, 1941. The ideologists of the propaganda hoped that appealing to the archetypes of perception of the established image would allow them to manipulate the population under occupation, and probably a certain category of the population positively perceived the emergence of familiar image, but for a significant part of it was an atavism and an image that had no meaning or was rather hostile. The failure of this campaign indicates the encouragement of this visual campaign, but the myth of the great war, Великая Отечественная война, by Russia itself is the main and consolidating one in Russians' information propaganda campaigns for both external and internal recipients. And punching and encountering evil has a tendency to return with even more terrible crimes, and the whole of Europe, the democratic world, is now threatened by racism. Okay, thank you for your attention and have a nice day. Thank you so much. Bye.